Hey guys, I'm back in the greenhouse today and I just started planting tomato plants a little bit early this year, but we're getting an early spring and there may be just a little bit of cold damage to some of the tomatoes I planted, but I think they're going to survive. But I'm about to start on these cucumbers, but before I do, I want to go over a list of close to 20 things or around 20 reasons that your tomatoes are producing lots of green foliage, but not the actual tomatoes. 20 critical steps that you need to use in growing tomatoes in a garden, in a container, wherever they may be. You need to follow along with these guidelines to produce the maximum number of fruits that you're going to grow each year. Now, certain varieties of tomatoes are going to produce better for you. That's just the way nature is. They've been hybridized so many times, and some will produce less, larger fruits, and some of them maybe smaller. Your Romas and your things like that are going to produce a lot more, the smaller varieties. But I'm going to put a list on the screen here that will give you an idea of which are the best varieties to plant if you're wanting to go for the maximum number of tomatoes for one growing season. Now, sometimes if you want those really large beefsteak tomatoes like I like to make a sandwich out of, you're not going to get as many tomatoes. But if you're wanting to do just pure production, then follow along with that list. You can pause it and take a look at them, and you'll know which varieties, and you can pick the one that you specifically want to produce the maximum number of tomatoes. Now, I probably plant more tomatoes than anything else, and I literally have to either give them away, put them on a little stand at the end of my driveway, and just put free tomatoes because there are just so many being produced. I can't eat them all, and I have to give them to friends and family, and I've still got too many. So when it comes to growing tomatoes, I have a lot of experience, over 25 years on this piece of property alone. Now, rule number 2 is sunlight, and if you can't get your tomatoes to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, it's just not going to produce what you want it to. You may be able to get some tomato growth, but you're not going to maximize or produce extreme results. This entire area used to be completely shaded, and I had to have a large oak tree cut down and a few other smaller trees to maximize the sunlight in the garden. So this didn't happen by chance. It was planned out so I could maximize the sunlight. A good vegetable garden will nearly be in all-day sunlight if you want to produce a lot of produce. Now, spacing or proper spacing is extremely critical when growing tomatoes. You want them spaced anywhere from 18 to 24 inches apart, and that is to keep them from competing for nutrients and moisture in the soil. So just remember, planting them too close together or having an extremely small pot that doesn't have the right amount of nutrients, it's going to be hard to maximize your tomato production. Not saying that you won't get tomatoes, but you want to maximize the amount each tomato plant is capable of, and that's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to maximize the absolute overall production of each plant so that you will be satisfied with the results at the end of the growing season. Now, pruning is extremely important with tomatoes. Now, this one seems to have a little bit of cold damage because I planted them a bit early last week, but I think they're going to be okay, as I said. But what we're trying to do is we want to remove any lower branches. We want to keep any branches from touching the ground because that can have diseases, but also we want to regularly maintain this. If it gets a little bit too large, it's going to start putting too much energy into producing stems, leaves, and things like that, suckers that come out of these elbows in there. We want to take those out as well. We want to keep it focused on producing fruit and not these leaves, because if it produces leaves, the plant will just continue to grow larger and larger. So you want to take that energy and focus it into the leaves. Remember, removing when you plant, remove these lower limbs that might be touching the ground, and also you want it to be focused, the sunlight to be focused on the upper area, not so much on the bottom of your tomato plant, because you want growth, but you want to have lots of energy coming from the sunlight to produce those tomatoes. Now, one more note about removing the suckers that will grow in the elbows of your tomato plants between the main stem and the branches. A lot of times you're going to have small shoots coming out here, more commonly known as suckers. You want to remove those before they become too large because you want the energy to be going into the main branches and the main stem. So just remember, you want to remove them often and quickly. You don't want to let them get out of hand. So just remember, you want to have your main stem and your main branches, and you don't want to have a lot of shoots coming out of your plant. That way we can focus it on production and not just growing more and more leaves and branches and things like that. So this support system I created a video about, and I'll link it up above, but it is basically there to help my tomatoes grow as high as possible where I can still reach them. And that's a critical thing. You want to have vertical growth. I used to use the small steel cages or whatever they're made out of from my local hardware store, but I wanted them to grow higher and higher so I can get more production and not just have them squatting close to the ground. So I wanted to create something like this to get maximum height. So that's another thing to take into consideration, is you want to stake them or use the largest tomato cage you can come across to grow them as high as possible so you can get them off the ground and producing more tomatoes through the growing season. Now, nitrogen is important when growing a vegetable garden, but if your nitrogen levels are too high and your phosphorus, you have kind of an imbalance there. You want your nitrogen to be as low as possible, and your phosphorus, the NPK, the P in NPK, you want it to be as high as possible. For instance, this bone meal has a very low nitrogen point. I think it's something like 2%, but phosphorus is 17%. So it's so critical to have a lot of phosphorus for fruit production, flower production, and then ultimately fruit production. So whether you're using something organic like this or you're using a synthetic fertilizer, make sure your NPK number, the P in NPK, is a much higher number. I'll put a link to a product that I've used in the past. It is synthetic, but it has an extremely high phosphorus count as opposed to the nitrogen. So it's really one of those things that if you want lots of tomatoes, it's a great product to use. I believe it's made by Schultz, and I've used it off and on some years. Some years I try all organic, some years I try synthetic to see what kind of results I do, and then I kind of take notes as to what happened. So whether you prefer all organic or you're willing to try some different synthetics, remember the phosphorus is a key to making tomato growth rather than just green leafy growth. Now, watering is one of the most critical steps in growing lots of tomatoes. You don't want to water every day. What you want to do is water about twice a week, but water deeply when you do to encourage deeper root growth. If you're watering every day and kind of shallow watering, well, you're not going to get that deep root growth that you need to produce the maximum amount of tomatoes. I've got one of these set up. I've had this in the greenhouse. This is my backup unit in case my primary unit dies, but these work great for just putting your watering on a schedule. So if you're really busy, you can buy one of these online. I'll put a link in the description, and it saves you a heck of a lot of time in case you forget and your tomatoes don't get water for that week. That can be really detrimental to the tomato growth. So remember, twice a week, but deep watering. So you can set the time on this, which will give it a nice deep watering to help encourage that deep root growth. Now, mulching is another secret to growing lots of tomatoes. You want to mulch really kind of maybe 1 to 2 inches thick, and I've tried things like pine straw, hay, different things, and the thing that I found to be most effective, I found at Lowe's warehouse. It was a shredded pine bark, very finely shredded, and I could put down a 2 or 3 inch layer. Now, not only does it help retain moisture in the soil, but it does something that I absolutely hate doing. It keeps me from having to do it. It's weeding. I hate weeding my vegetable garden. When I first started vegetable gardening, I just put down a very thin layer of pine straw and weeds would just grow right through it. So the soil conditioner is what you're looking for at Lowe's. It's a shredded pine bark. If you can't find it, you can use the larger shredded pine bark, but you may need to do a little bit thicker layer because the small shredded pine bark doesn't allow any weeds to grow through it. So mulching is another extremely important tip, and it also stabilizes the soil temperature, and it slowly decomposes, and at the end of the season you can mix it into the soil and have a fresh batch put in the next season. Now, this pH monitor I've had for probably over 2 decades, and this is a little bit newer one. It's a digital version. They do the same thing. They're monitoring the pH in the soil, and if you don't have proper pH, you're not going to get proper nutrient absorption into any of your vegetables or whatever you're growing. So you need to know whatever you're growing what its preferred pH is. Now, tomatoes is 6.0 to 6.8, a little bit on the acidic side, and having one of these, whether it's an old one or a new digital model, it really makes a difference because you can add or delete or just change up the soil structure based on what the tomato needs. And I'll put a link to, I don't think they sell these anymore, I'm not sure, but they definitely still have the digital ones out. I'll put a link down below so you can see exactly what your soil is doing and what you need to add to it. Now, I've taken a lot of steps to attract pollinators to the vegetable garden, such as buying this bee barn, which they'll go in there and they'll lay some eggs and they come back year after year. Also planting the right type of flowers. I'll put on the screen a list of flowers, but there's one that I found that is absolutely incredible, and it's a water-based plant, so you'll have to put it in a container that doesn't let the water drain out, but it's called pickerel, and you can order it online, or you might be lucky enough to find it at your local garden center, but pickerel attracted more flying pollinators to my garden than anything I've ever seen. Just a small containers, they're just constantly coming in, pollinating the pickerel, and then moving on to something like the tomatoes or whatever else I have growing in the garden. So remember, pollinators is another critical thing for tomato production. Now, your average toothbrush can help you create more tomatoes in your garden, and the way you do it is you'll go from flower to flower, just gently touching it and spreading the pollen throughout the entire flower. One thing that works even better than a common toothbrush is an electric toothbrush where you can just gently tap it, go on to the next. If you don't want to go to all that trouble, just simply shaking it and allowing some of the pollen to fall down. Unless you have a lot of wind in your area, sometimes a tomato plant can become very stagnant in its pollen release. So you can help it along the way by doing something like that, is just letting the pollen go from flower to flower and helping Mother Nature out if you don't have enough pollinators in your garden. Now, if you've grown tomatoes in the past, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about blossom end rot. The bottom part of your tomato will look very rotten and it's just kind of a ruined tomato. But one way you can prevent that is by getting more calcium into the soil. And I've got a video I'll link up above that talked about how to turn eggshells into a calcium supplement. It's very easy and it's pretty much free. Now, when I built this greenhouse many years ago, which is probably getting close to 20 years ago, I figured out I quickly had to add some shade cloth to the top of it because it got extremely hot. Even in the wintertime, it would get so hot in here on a day with full sunshine. So there is shade fabric all over the top of this, but your tomatoes may need that as well. If it gets above 90 degrees and you have some really intense sun in your area, you may want to build a shade fabric, maybe I would say 50% shade fabric, and put it over the top of it. You can order that online, and the place where I ordered this, I think it was Greenhouse Megastore, but that was a super bulk quantity, but you can now get it on Amazon. This is actually before the days of Amazon when I ordered this shade fabric. So if you need shade fabric, you can get it online, much easier. It's really hard to find in your local hardware store. It's kind of a specialty item, but it will save your tomatoes from extreme sun scorch. Now, I just did a video last week, I believe it was, about how to deter pests away from your tomato plants using oranges or citrus peels, and I'll link that up above. But keeping pests away from your tomatoes is extremely important, because if the tomato plant becomes infested, then you might possibly lose your entire crop coming from that individual plant, or maybe your entire garden if it's really bad enough. So you want to control pests as much as you can without using harsh chemicals. Now, it's critical to make sure, as I mentioned about mulch, that you keep weeds away from the base of your tomato plant. You want a weed-free area at least 2 to 3 feet from the base of the plant, because those weeds are going to be competing for the same nutrients in the soil. So remember, if you don't want to use mulch, you're going to have to go in there and manually weed, and it is a real headache. I would always recommend the shredded pine bark over manual weeding, but whatever you do, just make sure that the weeds are not competing with your tomatoes for nutrients. Now, pest in the garden is inevitable. There's just no way to stop them, but there's one particular pest. I'm going to put a picture of it up on the screen because a lot of people are just frightened when they see it. It looks like it could be something that could sting you. It's the common hornworm. They're basically harmless, but they can do a lot of harm to your tomato plant. I've actually seen a hornworm just devour a plant. One day it was there, and then the next day the plant had been half eaten. So hornworms, I've got a video I'll link about that in specific, about keeping hornworms under control and what you can do to keep them from destroying your tomato harvest. So you don't want your tomatoes over ripening on the vine. You want to harvest them as quickly as possible. Even if you want to make something like fried green tomatoes, you can look up the recipe online. But you don't want them to slow down producing the tomatoes, and that can happen if you're not harvesting regularly. In the beginning, you might actually do that to just help speed up the production. If the plant realizes that it's pretty much gone through its seed-making ability, it can slow down there. So just remember, harvest often and regularly, even if you're taking some green tomatoes to help it produce more tomatoes throughout the growing season. So guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you have a question about this video or any previous video, and I think I have over 200 videos now, and I cover a wide range of topics from heating greenhouses to growing bonsai and vegetables around the yard. So if you have a question, please become a public subscriber first, because I put those people to the front of the line. I just get so many questions and comments, I can't possibly go through each one of them and give you an adequate and accurate answer each time. So guys, thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.